Elara Vance learned the power of grace the first time she was punished for telling the truth. It happened in a room made almost entirely of glass. Glass walls, glass table, polished surfaces that reflected faces back at themselves, whether they wanted to see them or not. The kind of room designed to reward confidence and quietly punish hesitation. Elara noticed these things immediately, the way she noticed most things, not because she was anxious, but because observation had always been her instinct. She had prepared for this meeting for weeks. Not because she enjoyed attention. She didn't. But because the strategy she had developed carried weight, risk, consequence. It was the culmination of months of work. Late evenings running projections while the office emptied around her, quiet mornings correcting assumptions no one else had caught, long stretches of thinking through second and third-order effects that would never appear on a slide. The work lived mostly in margins and footnotes, in models too complex to summarize cleanly. She cared about getting it right. That was who Elara had always been. Even as a child, she had been more interested in how things functioned than in how they appeared. While other children competed for praise, Elara reorganized systems no one asked her to touch, straightening shelves, correcting schedules, noticing inefficiencies, and quietly resolving them before anyone complained. Adults described her as mature. Teachers called her reliable. Very few people asked what it cost her to be that way, or how often she learned to swallow disappointment before it reached her face. By the time she joined Aurelian Strategies, a firm known for polished leadership and aggressive growth, she had internalized a quiet rule many women learn without being taught. Do the work. Let the results speak. And for a long time they did. Her models were solid. Her insights sharp. Her instincts reliable. When something succeeded, she could trace its roots back to decisions she'd made quietly, often invisibly. She didn't mind the invisibility. She told herself it was temporary. That substance eventually outweighed spectacle. That someone eventually would notice. Marcus Hale was already seated when she entered the boardroom. He looked at ease, leaning back slightly, jacket unbuttoned, one arm draped casually over the chair beside him. Marcus always looked like this, comfortable in rooms that made other people tighten. He had a talent for presence, for filling space without seeming to strain. He knew how to hold eye contact just long enough, how to smile without appearing eager, how to speak with the cadence of certainty. People liked Marcus. They described him as charismatic, decisive, visionary. He spoke with confidence even when his understanding was broad rather than deep. And because confidence is persuasive, people assumed competence followed. Marcus wasn't foolish. That was the dangerous part. He grasped ideas quickly. He could summarize a concept well enough to sound authoritative. But he disliked details, found them tedious. They slowed him down. He preferred conclusions without the discipline of the path that led to them. He trusted instinct more than process, and charm more than verification. That was where Elara came in. When she had first been assigned to his team, Marcus praised her constantly, privately. He told her she was invaluable, that her work sharpened his thinking, that he trusted her judgment implicitly. He asked for her opinion often, nodded thoughtfully when she spoke, and repeated her insights in meetings as if they were shared discoveries. At the time, it felt collaborative, generous even. Elara mistook this for respect. At first, the arrangement worked. She built the frameworks. He presented them. She answered the difficult questions. He accepted the praise. It felt, to her, like proximity to power, like apprenticeship, like learning how influence actually operated in the world she had chosen. Slowly, though, something shifted. Marcus stopped introducing her as the architect of the work. Then he stopped introducing her at all. Her ideas remained. Her name faded. Elara noticed the change the way she noticed everything else, not dramatically, but precisely. A missing acknowledgement here. A rephrased sentence there. A meeting summary that referred to the team instead of her. Small omissions, individually plausible, collectively unmistakable. She considered addressing it. But each time she hesitated. Not because she doubted herself, but because she understood the social cost of speaking. She had watched other women labeled difficult for less. She told herself it was temporary. that the work still mattered more than the credit, that pushing back might cost her more than silence. That belief carried her into the meeting. The boardroom filled slowly. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Laptops opened. Water glasses were adjusted. Elara stood when it was time, smoothing the edge of her notes more out of habit than nerves. She felt calm, prepared, grounded in the logic of what she was about to say. She began steadily, her voice even, her slides precise. She explained the assumptions behind the strategy, the conditions under which it would succeed, the scenarios in which it would fail. She spoke carefully, knowing that oversimplification here could cost the firm later. She believed still that clarity would be valued. The board listened for the first few minutes. Then Marcus interrupted. Not sharply, not rudely, just enough to alter the rhythm of the room. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he said, leaning back slightly. Some of these conclusions might be speculative. The word landed softly, wrapped in politeness. Speculative. Elara felt the shift immediately, not as anger, but as a cold, precise awareness. She clarified, cited her sources, referenced the methodology Marcus himself had approved weeks earlier. She kept her tone neutral, professional, controlled, as if careful delivery could still protect the substance. Marcus smiled. Of course, he said, but sometimes passion can get ahead of objectivity. Passion. The room grew very still. No one objected. No one intervened. The word did its quiet work, reframing rigor as emotion, precision as excess. Elara felt something tighten in her chest, not rage, but grief, a sudden understanding that this was not a misunderstanding. This was positioning. She finished her presentation, thanked the board, sat down. Marcus followed, summarizing her work as collective insight. Softer, safer, his. The risks smoothed. The responsibility diffused. The board applauded. Afterward, Marcus caught up with her in the hallway. You did well, he said, lowering his voice. But you need to learn how to read a room. Elara smiled. And something inside her went very still. That evening, she walked home instead of taking the train. She needed the time. The air was cold. The city loud in the way it always was. She replayed the meeting in her mind, not emotionally, but analytically. She traced where power had moved, where it had closed, where truth had been treated as disruption rather than contribution. She realized that accuracy alone had never been the metric. She understood then that truth delivered without regard for power was often treated as inconvenience. Timing mattered. Perception mattered. And grace, real grace, was not softness. It was restraint. From that point on, Elara stopped correcting Marcus in public. She stopped clarifying his errors mid-sentence. She stopped stepping in when his explanations drifted from accuracy. Each time it happened, she felt the instinct to intervene, and each time she let it pass, even when it cost her sleep. She became agreeable. She nodded. She smiled. She said, of course. And she documented everything. Emails, drafts, versions, meeting notes. Not with bitterness, but with care. With the same attention she brought to her work. She told herself that if she was going to be erased, she would at least preserve the record. Marcus noticed the change and mistook it for growth. Much better, he said after one meeting in which he misstated a core metric. Elara thanked him. Without her quiet corrections, Marcus grew bolder. He spoke longer, explained more. He relied increasingly on familiar phrases, confident gestures, broad assurances. And because no one interrupted him, not even Elara, his confidence expanded unchecked. Privately, Elara noticed the cracks widening. He reused language without understanding context. He skipped steps. He assumed outcomes. She felt the strange discipline of watching someone dismantle their own credibility while believing they were ascending. The symposium invitation arrived weeks later. A high-profile industry event. Press, investors, analysts. The kind of audience that rewarded substance and punished vagueness, even politely. Marcus was chosen to keynote. He was delighted. Elara, he said, I'll need your help preparing. She agreed. Over weeks, she listened as he rehearsed. He misquoted figures, flattened models she had spent months refining. When she asked careful, neutral questions, he dismissed them. The audience won't care, he said. She smiled. Of course. The auditorium was full the day of the symposium. The lights were bright, the air charged with attention. Elara felt strangely calm, as if she were watching an experiment reach its final stage. Marcus took the stage to applause. Elara sat several rows back, hands folded, expression neutral. At first, it went well. Then the questions began. Specific ones, technical ones, the kind that demanded understanding rather than performance. Marcus faltered. He improvised. He circled answers without landing them. He smiled too often. He spoke too long. A senior analyst stood. Is Elara Vance present? Marcus froze. Elara rose. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only calm. She answered precisely, clearly, briefly. She corrected nothing that hadn't been asked. She exposed nothing deliberately. She simply explained. The room leaned toward clarity. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. It was decisive. The shift afterward unfolded quietly. Press coverage changed tone. Elara's name appeared more often. Marcus's appeared less, and never alone. Invitations followed. Questions arrived addressed directly to her. Inside the firm, conversations changed shape. Not accusations. Questions. Who had built the models? Who understood them? Marcus was reassigned. His title remained impressive. Firms like Aurelian rarely stripped status outright, but his scope narrowed. Fewer decisions. Less visibility. A role that required translation rather than authorship. The kind of position that rewarded polish but exposed the limits of it. Elara was asked, carefully, tentatively, to step forward. Not all at once. Not with ceremony. Power rarely announces itself when it changes hands. It arrives through calendar invites that suddenly include you by default. Through questions directed at you instead of around you. Through pauses in meetings where people wait, not impatiently, but expectantly, for your response. She accepted the shift without comment. That restraint confused some people. They expected satisfaction. Or bitterness. Or at least a narrative. Elara offered none. She continued working as she always had, thoroughly, precisely, with an almost quiet reverence for getting things right. She corrected errors before they grew. She clarified assumptions before they hardened into dogma. She spoke less often than others, but when she did, the room adjusted around her words. People began to describe her differently. Measured. Trusted. Steady. They stopped saying quiet. Marcus avoided her at first. Then, weeks later, he asked for a meeting. They sat in a smaller conference room this time. Wood instead of glass. No reflections. I didn't realize, he said finally, how much of it was you. Elara considered her response. Not strategically, instinctively. She felt no urge to wound him. No desire to correct the past. She had learned that truth delivered too late often served no one. I know, she said. The simplicity of it unsettled him more than accusation would have. When he left, Elara sat alone for a moment, hands resting on the table. She felt something loosen, not triumph, but release. The long vigilance she had carried eased, just slightly. She hadn't won. She had outlasted. That was the difference. In the months that followed, Elara was given authority she hadn't sought but had always carried. She insisted on clarity where others preferred momentum. She asked uncomfortable questions early, before they could become public failures. She protected her team fiercely, crediting their work explicitly, naming contributions in rooms where names mattered. Some called her demanding. She let that stand. Grace, she had learned, was not silence. It was precision. It was knowing when to speak, when to wait, and when to let consequence do the work that explanation never could. It was refusing to perform outrage for an audience that would only consume it and move on. Grace was discipline. Years later, A junior analyst would ask her how she navigated politics without becoming bitter. Elara thought for a moment before answering. Power doesn't respond to force the way people think it does, she said. It responds to consistency, to credibility, to memory. The analyst frowned slightly. Memory. Elara smiled, not kindly but knowingly. Organizations remember who makes them look foolish, and they remember who saves them from it. You don't need to announce which one you are. The story of Marcus faded the way most stories do, not with a moral, but with absorption. He became a footnote in longer narratives, a cautionary example used quietly, never publicly. Elara never spoke of him unless asked. Even then, she spoke without edge. That, too, was grace. The real lesson came later, long after the symposium had been archived and the headlines forgotten. It came when Elara found herself in a glass-walled room again, this time at the head of the table. Across from her sat a woman early in her career. Brilliant, careful, overprepared. The kind of person who believed, as Elara once had, that excellence alone could protect her. The woman spoke. She explained her work. She offered truth without armor. Someone interrupted. Elara raised a hand. Let her finish, she said calmly. The room adjusted, and Elara understood then, not intellectually, but fully, that grace was never just personal survival. It was stewardship. It was the responsibility that came with seeing clearly and choosing not to look away. She had learned it the first time she was punished for telling the truth. She practiced it every time after by making sure fewer people were punished for telling the truth. Elara didn't speak again until the young analyst finished. There was a beat of silence afterward, the kind that usually invited someone louder to fill it, but Elara let it breathe. She watched the room recalibrate, watched people actually consider what had been said instead of how quickly they could respond. Thank you, Elara said at last. That was thorough. Let's talk about the implications. The meeting shifted. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but decisively. The conversation moved where it should have gone all along, toward substance. When it ended, the analyst lingered. I didn't expect that, she admitted quietly. I thought I'd messed up. Elara studied her for a moment. She saw herself there, not as she was now, but as she had been. Capable, careful, unsure whether truth was welcome. You didn't, Elara said. You just spoke before the room was ready. That's not the same thing. The analyst nodded, absorbing this as if it were something she might need later. She probably would. That night, Elara stayed late, not out of obligation, but habit. The office emptied gradually, lights dimming in sections. She liked the quiet that followed. It reminded her that institutions, for all their noise, were ultimately fragile things, built on attention, sustained by trust, undone by neglect. She opened an old folder on her laptop. It wasn't labeled with Marcus's name. She had never named it that. It was simply called Archive. Inside were years of drafts, notes, iterations. Evidence, yes, but also memory. A record not of wrongdoing, but of work. Of continuity. Of care. She closed it without opening a single file. She didn't need it anymore. Aurelian changed under her influence, though few people would have described it that way. The changes were subtle. Meetings ran shorter. Decisions slowed just enough to improve. Credit became explicit, almost unfashionably so. People learned that speaking precisely mattered more than speaking confidently. Some resisted. A few left. Elara let them. Leadership, she discovered, wasn't about being liked. It was about being trusted, especially when the answer disappointed, delayed, or demanded more than people wanted to give. She learned to withstand the discomfort of that, to let silence work in her favor, to let outcomes speak louder than reassurance ever could. She was still quiet, but no one mistook that for absence anymore. Years passed. Her name became associated with stability, with integrity, with the kind of decision-making that didn't chase headlines but endured scrutiny. She was invited to speak, not because she dazzled, but because she clarified. because she didn't pretend complexity could be avoided. At one conference, a moderator asked her, smiling, "What's the most important lesson you've learned about leadership?" Elara paused. "Not for effect, for accuracy. Most people think leadership is about knowing when to act," she said. "It's not. It's about knowing when not to. When to let systems reveal themselves. When to let people show you who they are without interruption." The moderator nodded, satisfied. But that wasn't the whole truth. Elara knew that. The real lesson, the one she never put on slides, was harder to articulate. It was that truth didn't need protection, but it did need timing. That grace wasn't forgiveness or softness or compliance. It was the refusal to become small in response to someone else's insecurity. It was the discipline of patience when impatience would have felt righteous. It was understanding that power, when mishandled, collapsed under its own weight, and that sometimes the most radical thing you could do was step back and let it. Late one evening, as she prepared to leave, Elara passed the glass-walled boardroom. She stopped. For a moment, she saw herself years ago, standing with notes in her hands, believing accuracy would be enough, believing fairness was automatic, believing visibility followed merit without guidance. She didn't judge that version of herself. She respected her. That woman had done the work. She had held the line. She had learned restraint the hard way, and in doing so, had learned something rarer than ambition. She had learned grace. Elara turned off the lights and walked out into the night, unhurried. The city moved around her as it always had, loud, indifferent, alive with momentum. She moved within it calmly, no longer trying to be seen, no longer afraid of being overlooked. She knew now that the truth had its own gravity. And if you were willing to stand still long enough, it would come to you. Thanks for watching. If you really enjoy the stories, please don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel. This shows us you really care and want more. Here's another video to watch.